all the things we've learned, I think one of the biggest ones is take a short walk after a meal, 10, 15, 20 minutes, ideally after every meal. And it's essentially like getting the best bang for your buck from a meal. So I would say, yeah, certainly walking. It's so simple, but so much like hordes of research literature, I think, support that it's one of the walking a lot throughout the day, the low level movement and that constant stimulation of, AMPK and these different pathways is very important for kind of keeping the body constitutively moving through glucose, as opposed to just chunking it in one exercise block, which of course is going to be very different physiology than low grade movement throughout the entire day. And I really like to think about it as like you can either constantly be triggering these pathways to keep working, keep bringing the GLUT4, keep bringing GLUT4 to the cell membrane all throughout the day, or you can chunk it. And ideally, we'd have intense exercise in a chunk, but also this low grade movement throughout the day. So I think that's one of like the biggest takeaways I've seen from both the levels data, but also just like the general research literature about walking.
That's very valuable. That's very valuable for anyone listening, because regardless of where you're starting, everybody can move. And whether it's walking or push-ups or squats, it is post-meal disposal, leveraging skeletal muscle, very critical, independent of insulin. So what Casey is saying is that you can move blood glucose out of the bloodstream into skeletal muscle independent of insulin. And that is incredible, because we know that muscle accounts for 70+% of glucose disposal. You had mentioned, there's a few things that I really want to talk about. I'm curious as if there's very particular foods that surprised you. I'm curious about what you're seeing with alcohol. Again, I know that it's very difficult because typically individuals are not drinking a Coke, right? Or if you are, shame on you. I'm kidding. But are there certain foods that you see that surprised you? For example, I don't know, a banana, or any food in particular that surprised you with its increase in glucose?
Yeah, I think the foods that have been most surprising to me are breakfast foods, to be honest. I think that one of the biggest deltas we see between like a healthy response and an unhealthy response really happens with breakfast, because so many American breakfast foods are so heavy on refined carbohydrates and refined sugar. And so some of the breakfast food responses are the highest we see in our entire data set. And it's often when like certain words are mentioned in the log, because of course, it's very, like you said, it's hard to parse this data because people are eating lots of different things together. So it's not like it's clean data, but like generally speaking, when you have words that are within the log, like juice, donut, pastry, toast, croissant, muffin, bagel, cereal is like a real disaster in terms of glucose response in the data set. Cereal of almost all kinds, even the ones that kind of masquerade as like healthy, tend to have, some of these very large glucose responses. And but then on the flip side, some of the more balanced breakfasts that we see logged, so phrases like eggs and avocado, even like eggs and greens, frittata, chia pudding, almond butter. Like these are types of words that, when you see the patterns of those words tend to be some of the lowest glucose responses. So it just feels like, based on what we're seeing, there's this huge opportunity with breakfast to really, and I'm one thing I hope is that some of this, as this levels data becomes more organized and we can hopefully get more of it out there, that it'll really help push culture forward. We all know that like refined grains and sugars are not good, but when you kind of see these like significant patterns of logs that include these terms being really huge spikers, and the ones that are much more balanced having such low glucose responses, it really shows you how much it can really set you up for success if you make those latter choices. And so, so some of the breakfasts that have been consistently low spikers would be the things like eggs and avocado, eggs and greens, frittata, chia pudding. Often those are paired with low glycemic fruits like berries and almond butter. And then we see a lot of people, one of our advisors is Kelly Levesque, and we see a lot of people logging her smoothie, which is called the Fab 4 smoothie.
I love Kelly, by the way. Just sent her an email yesterday. Yeah.
She's such an amazing, but she's really popularized this very simple recipe, which I think is emblematic of what a balanced meal can look like, which is essentially it's very high protein. It's very high, it's high fat. She puts like, she's not afraid of fat, almond butter, people can use whole milk, whatever, fiber and greens. And so it's a smoothie that's like quite well balanced and isn't going to just sort of like load your, and those tend to be, less than 15 milligram per deciliter spikes for breakfast. So I'd say breakfast is a huge opportunity. We also see, like, in terms of some of the very, very worst things in the data set, I would say cereal is up there, but also very specific, and then of course soda, but very specific types of candies. So at one point, and I'm not sure if this still holds true, but like the very, very, very worst food in the data set was Skittles. And this is so not surprising. Like all candy is, not going to be optimal for our sort of cellular biology, but these candies that are like naked carbohydrates, like they don't even really have any fat or protein. Like you look at a Snickers bar and there's actually some like fat and protein in it to kind of maybe slow the absorption of glucose. But a Skittle or something like a lollipop or like a Starburst or something like these that just are just straight sugar macronutrient focused, they tend to be some of the absolute worst. And so if I were to eat candy, it would definitely push me towards eating like a more balanced candy, like maybe one with nuts or something like that, as opposed to these just like straight injections of sugar into the bloodstream.
I like that. So basically you're saying if you're going to make a bad choice, make a bad choice wisely. I can appreciate that. Also, what you are seeing in the data set and what we know in some of the literature out of Heather Leidy's lab talking about combination meals, protein first, not breakfast skipping, really changes the impulse to eat later on in the day. People really care about weight loss. People care about weight loss. People care about weight loss as it relates to blood sugar regulation, not being hungry. Absolutely agree with you. In terms of that first meal, the data would support that is actually the most critical. And while individuals typically have fasted for that first meal, I believe we're going to start to see a shift coming back to actually eating earlier on and stopping eating earlier rather than pushing that fasting window.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And one key reason for this, of why, like, I think breakfast is so important to get right if you are going to eat breakfast, is because the research is showing that it's the crash after a spike that is often when we see people have the most cravings for high calorie, high carbohydrate foods. So if you have a very high glucose spike, basically the body is going to respond by releasing a lot of insulin and, trying to soak all that glucose out of the bloodstream. And that can often lead to a post-meal crash, which the technical term for is reactive hypoglycemia. And there was actually a paper that I think was published in Nature, in the last couple of years, that basically looked at the time when you're crashing, so going below baseline, which is kind of how a reactive hypoglycemia is defined. That is when people are often have the highest cravings for like carbohydrate meals, and the extent of reactive hypoglycemia can actually predict how much people are going to eat later in the day.
And also, not to interrupt you, this is our patients. These are our patients who are waking up in the middle of the night to eat.
Yes.
You guys, the people that have, and it's so interesting, binge eating disorder, night waking and going to the kitchen and eating and not remembering it. We see this with individuals. We put a monitor on them and they're having reactive hypoglycemia.